If someone asks you, hey, how are you doing? What is your go to response? Truthfully, I typically say, I'm good, but I'm busy. Busyness can so often be a badge of honour for us, a way of proving our worth to ourselves and to others. But busyness isn't simply a badge of honour, it's actually an idol that rips us away from the love of God as we pour our days, our years, and our lives onto the altars of successism and self optimization. Busyness isn't just our go to answer, it's also our go to way of life. And you know, and I know that it's killing us. We're all overstretched, over notified, overtired, run ragged by the tyranny of the urgent, and unable to shake that unresolved feeling that there's one thing that we must do, one thing that we must complete before we can relax. As Marilyn Robinson says, the spirit of the times is one of joyless urgency. Urgency just squeezes the joy out of life, and in fact, urgency squeezes God out of our lives too. Our hectic, always on the edge of burnout lives mean that we're often running around circles around Jesus when He is always inviting us to slow down, to recover our lives, and to invite Him to teach us what it means to take a real rest. Rest that looks and feels like the unforced rhythms of grace. And this is why we want to invite you to put into practice the weekly rhythm of Sabbath. From the very beginning, God has woven a pattern of rest into the very fabric of His creation. In Genesis 1, there's this refrain that runs throughout the creation narrative. At the end of each day, we read, and there was evening and there was morning. Evening comes first. And what do you do in the evening? Well, you rest. And what do you do in the morning? Well, you get to work. Now, we have been formed by our non-stop, overworked age to view our lives by what we achieve and what we accomplish. For us, work is the first thing in our heads, it's our priority, and so we always bust ourselves until we crash. That is our pattern of life. And yet the first page of our story shows us just how much we've got this all wrong. Because for God, rest comes first. We are to live and to work from rest. And rest is such a priority from God that in Genesis 2 verse 2 we read this. By the seventh day, God had finished the work that He had been doing, and so on the seventh day He rested from all of His work. God blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy because He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. I really want you to clock this. God rested, and so should you. On the seventh day in the creation story, God Sabbathed. And Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means simply stop. On Sabbath days, we're to stop the busyness, stop work, stop life admin, stop the pressure, and we're to rest in the presence of God. Sabbath is the first thing in the story of God to be named as holy, as set apart. And so Sabbath is a day in our week that is to be set apart from the other 6 days. It should look different from the rest of our days. It is to be more life-giving and should feel richer as we learn to truly rest in the love of God. Through a weekly day of rest, we're invited to enter into holy time, which, as we see from Exodus, isn't just a suggestion or a bolt-on or a bonus or a nice idea. No, it's actually a command that as we learn to arrange our lives, through these 6 days we can work and tick off all of our tasks, but on the seventh day we can breathe deeply and receive God's gift of stopping. Jesus Himself adopted this weekly rhythm. He rested and He worshipped on the seventh day, and He also healed people on the Sabbath, helping us see that this is to be a day of restoration, a day when the healing and the good order of the kingdom is to take a hold of life on earth. And I know that Sabbath can sound a little bit quaint. It may even sound like an outdated idea. I also know that for some of us that have grown up through church, we can slip into thinking that Sabbath is a restrictive rhythm made up by all of these should nots. But I believe that Sabbath is one of God's best gifts for us. I think it is to be the best day of our weeks, a day when we can forget all of the necessary tasks and without hesitation enjoy the goodness of God. It's a day when we can set aside all of our "oh, I have to's" and grab a hold of "oh, yes, I get to's." And so I've come to see that Sabbath is to be defined by 3 things: rest, worship, and delight. Getting going with setting aside a day for resting, worshipping, and delighting can be a bit tricky, not only because it waxes where our modern life wanes, but also it is tricky because Sabbath is ultimately an act of surrender. Sabbath keeping may be the best indicator that we get grace, as we learn to rest in the truth that while we are accomplishing nothing, God still loves us. Sabbath people have weaned themselves off the need to prove themselves to God and to others. And we often feel as if the world depends on us, right? And so we're often powering through our limits, returning back to the shadowy desire that we see in the beginning of our story to live like God. We want to just be Him. The thing is, we're not God. We're human and we're limited. And the weekly rhythm of Sabbath reminds us every week that Jesus is Lord and we are not. We don't have to stretch ourselves, stressing out about every single detail of our lives. No, we can learn to trust Jesus who loves us. We can learn to let go for one day a week, handing our concerns over to Jesus. Sabbath is the day where we can dive deeply into the grace and mercy of God, learning to rest in His love and His Lordship. And Sabbath should also feel like coming home. A.J. Suoba says, a Sabbath day on earth is heaven's pre-season. Heaven is an eternal Sabbath. Through our Sabbath days, we get to practice eternity now, sparking our imagination with a picture of what our future will be like. And when you get into the rhythm of it, Sabbath will not simply change one day, but it will actually change all of your life. As Walter Brueggemann says, people who keep the Sabbath live all of their days differently. Making this one day different will make every day different as we enter into our weeks replenished and present enough to love and to serve others well. Ultimately, Sabbath is a day for joy, for laughter, for good company, for napping, for nature, for prayer, for brunch, for slowing right the way down and allowing our souls to catch up with our bodies. So, how do you get started? Well, if Sabbath is a day for rest, for worship and delight, take time just to consider what activities, what things lead you into resting, worshipping and delighting. By rest, I'm talking about deep, replenishing forms of rest, not cheap kind of rest like binging Netflix or whatever. By worship, I'm talking about any activity that helps lift our eyes and our souls to God in both gratitude and devotion. That could be prayer, spiritual reading, gathering with the church, hiking, or gentle gardening. And by delight, I'm talking about anything, absolutely anything that fills you with pure, holy, unfiltered joy. This could be playing with your kids, cooking that meal, visiting your favourite place, or chipping away at that piece of art. And as you consider what leads you towards rest, worship and delight, you can have a fun conversation with a friend or with your family, but you could also just get a page and just make 3 columns with the titles rest, worship and delight, and just list the things that lead you in those directions. Just make sure that you chat about or write down activities that are affordable, accessible and attainable in your actual life. And from there, consider which day in your week could actually work as a Sabbath day, a day to say no to work and a day to say yes to rest, worship and delight. Now for most of us, this will land on the weekend, but for those of us that are in a different stage of life or who have a different work pattern, our Sabbath could fall on a different day. But whatever day it lands on, you have the freedom to begin to weave in some of these activities into your next Sabbath day. And then week on week, just keep setting aside this day and begin to make a habit of doing these things that lead you in the rest and the affection of God. It really is that simple. However, there are 3 things I would love to highlight as you get going with the practice of Sabbath. Number 1, be proactive. It's important to look ahead to your next Sabbath and schedule or chat through with your family or friends a couple of things that you're actually wanting to do. Now, nothing is required on a Sabbath. It is to be full of flexibility and freedom, but having a couple of ideas of what you would like to do will save you from falling back into cheaper forms of rest or just picking up work, which we are to do through the rest of our week. Number 2, mark time. In the Jewish tradition, Shabbat begins at sundown on Friday evenings, where families would gather together for a meal, and as they got around the table, they would begin their Sabbath day by lighting a candle. And this simple ritual would help differentiate the Sabbath day from the rest of the week. Now, it may not be a candle for you, but it is important to develop a ritual that helps mark time. Most Friday afternoons, whenever Emma is coming home from work, Eliza and I will intentionally walk out to the driveway to meet her as she drives in. We greet her and we welcome her. And this simple moment of embrace helps us all feel that the work week is now over and now it is time for us to rest as a family. Number 3, just stop. The biggest struggle with Sabbathing is learning to just stop. Even as we light our candles, begin to rest, worship, and delight, the truth is there are countless things that are still on our to-do lists. And yet, regardless of all of the things, we just have to set them down and stop. The rest of God is not a reward for completing everything. If we only stop when we're finished, we will just never stop, right? But Sabbath is the gift of stopping in the thick of our tasks without apology, without guilt, simply because God has told us to do so. And so, what straining, necessary things can you set aside for one day a week? And what life-giving, God-orientating things can you pick up? Ruth Haley Barton once said, "I do not know everything there is to know about Sabbath. What I do know is there have to be times in your life when you move slow. There have to be times to sit and wait for the fullness of God that replenishes body, mind, and soul. There has to be time for the fullness of time, or time it is meaningless." Friends, Sabbath is never meaningless. Rest is never a waste of time. For Sabbath rest actually sanctifies time itself and draws us into the center of meaning, which is the love of God. And so may you enter into rest, worship, and pure delight as you put into practice the weekly rhythm of Sabbath. If we can help you with this practice in any way, please do get in touch. But enjoy learning what it means to take a real rest every week. Grace and peace to you all.